Well, a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Tomorrow we will be hitting the fabulous city of Bangkok. Would you please welcome with another great informative talk today about the glories of Bangkok, Captain Richard Heyman.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Nick, and Savadi Krap, which is the universal Thai greeting. And Thailand and the Thai language and the Thai people are a very special place. I imagine almost all of you have already been to Bangkok or around Thailand. So what I'm going to talk about today is perhaps very familiar to you. But when people say, are you going to Asia, or I would like to plan a trip to Asia, where should I go? And for particularly many in Europe and the Americas, Asia is a very vast place without much similarity between each other. And so from the stretch from India to Japan and North China down to Indonesia, there's such a variety of culture and people and languages that among most Asians, there's not really that much sense of similarity in many places. But Thailand is sort of right in the middle of the great variety sweep of Asia. And in Western literature, this area used to be called Indochina, Indochine, which has a cultural background of being in the midst of the cultural influences from India to China. But I always remember somebody said, when I was a student, I read all about Indochina, but when did it become two different countries? Well, of course, the world is wide, and wherever we go, there's more to know, even if you've been there many times. And I'm going to talk about Bangkok in particular today. I imagine some of you have been to the other parts of Thailand, it's not that large a country, but it's very variegated. But of course, Bangkok is the capital, the big city, and 1 out of 6 of the 25 million Thai live in Bangkok. And so it holds itself as the capital city with a reputation for being somewhat very charming and very exhausting and noisy and crowded and many things that are a bit of a shock to the system of many visitors. Now, I'm going to go through an exercise to read to you the name of, in Thai, of Bangkok. Teresa was talking about it. It's in Thai, it's called Thrum Thep, or the City of Angels. But the full name is Kung Thipannum Hannum Anuratanos Kosin Mahentraya Ayutya Mahalintropop Nohim Hutsim Ratcharam Burannum Untaratmara Wittadhasa Anraliman Awanasahit Sakayayita Vitsikam Parasit. Got that? I hope nobody speaks Thai enough to criticize but I will speak in my very bad English, which is called also American. And it's Bangkok is the city of angels, the great city of immortals, magnificent city of the 9 gems, seat of the king, city of royal palaces, home of the gods incarnate, erected by Visvaskaram at Indra's behest. It's also known as the greatest traffic jam in this part of Asia. It is right here. We're sailing right now right through the central Gulf of Thailand. You can watch on one of the channels where the ship is slipping right up into the upper Gulf and right into the mouth of the great river Chao Praya, which is the major river system of Thailand, which drains actually from up in Chiang Mai. And Thailand is this very unusual shaped country with a great central plain, and then it's surrounded by mountains on all the sides, and then the spine of the mountains go all the way down to Malaysia. There is a Pacific coast of Thailand if you've been down to Phuket and this beautiful area down here. But most of the country, of course, faces the Gulf of Thailand. You have a very broad agricultural land in the northeast, which is where there's still a lot of agricultural population and a lot of poverty up there. But in the recent decades, Thailand has gone from a largely agricultural country to a mostly urban culture, an industrialized nation. And the population has grown tremendously, but it has also enriched itself. So it's not a poor country like it used to be. There are still poor people, but it is relatively prosperous compared to it, particularly its neighbors in the neighborhood from Burma to Cambodia, Laos. So Bangkok is right here at the center, at the crux of the bay, at the main shipping port, where most of the commerce and industry comes out. Bangkok is the capital province with a center city and many outlying areas. That's the symbol flag of Bangkok, which has can't see it, but there's an elephant in it. And elephants, of course, are a symbol of the nation. Here is an old French map of when it was called Siam. And you heard Tracy said yesterday how the nation has changed its name from Thailand to Siam. Siam was a royal honorific name, but Thai is actually the name of the people. It's the ethnic name. And if you've been into southwest China, you'll know that there's a minority people in Yunnan called the Dai, which are the antecedents of the Thai. And it's said that in very prehistoric times, the people that are now Thai came down the mountains, came down to the river valleys, and settled Thailand and made it what it is today. But they keep changing the name interchangeably. So if you ask somebody if they're from Thailand, and they'll so often say, yes, I am. So I didn't say that's another bad joke. I'm sorry. You have to put up with these things, but only one at a time. So you can see this kind of variegated country, and again, the geography sort of determined its fate, because Thailand faces east, faces into the China Sea with only a bit of the Indian Ocean. But its culture is very mixed. If you go back into the longer history, you find that there were prehistoric peoples and early cities and civilizations. This is a Bongchang pottery that was from northern Thailand, dates over 2000 BC. So there were urban and artisan cultures very early in Thailand. In some of the museums, National Museum of Bangkok, you can see the great bronze drums, which are ceremonial metal drums that were some of the earliest artifacts. And this is common throughout Southeast Asia and led to the great metallophone musical culture, which you see still alive, especially in Indonesia. But when the first Europeans came all the way over here and they came to visit Siam, they came at the time when Ayutthaya was the capital of the nation. Now this was a later capital that was only set up in the 1400s, and then it was destroyed by the Burmese invaders in 1732. But it became the model for Bangkok. When it was built on an island on the Chao Praya River, it was fortified and had palaces and shopping areas and vibrant population. But today it's just a ruin. Some of us are going to go up to that site to see the remains of the palace and the temples. And this is an unfortunate fate of a great, glorious capital city where the temples and the stupas and all of the decorations were destroyed. There's still burn marks on the bricks, but this has the traditional architecture you'll see in its full, let's say, fresher version in Bangkok, especially the great prang, the great towers, which are indigenous architecture to Southeast Asia. Those of you going to Angkor Wat will see more of this, these great elaborated towers that are very symbolic of Indian and then Buddhist culture. This is not a restored ruin. It's left as a national park. Only small parts of it have been even repaired, but it never got overgrown by the jungle in the same way as Angkor Wat. The central upper valley of Thailand on the Chao Phraya is fairly dry compared to other areas on the Mekong Delta. So this ruin is still fairly open. And if you've ever been to there's another analogous ruin in Burma called Pagan, which is up the Irrawaddy, and has similar kind of this Southeast Asian temple structures, which are quite remarkable. Here is one of the great Buddhas in the main temple at Ayutthaya that was restored to honor the Buddha, and the roof was put back on, and the masonry structure was again regilded. So when you go there, you can see that this is one of the few areas of the former capital that were repaired as a shrine. Now, most of it, though, is destroyed, and you may have seen pictures of all of the headless Buddhas. They were a collector's item, and here's one that got caught by a tree that was collecting Buddha heads. But the history of Thailand is often very violent. Someone was asking me earlier, did Thailand and Vietnam and Burma have naval battles in these waters? And to my knowledge, they didn't, because they always had these flat plains, and they would ride on their war elephants and go chase each other around. And you can go through all the dynasties and all the conquests between the Thais, the Burmese, the Khmer, the Cambodians, and then the Vietnamese. And they unfortunately, until recently, have still been fighting. There's still struggles and controversies and military standoffs on the Thai-Cambodian border, and then the Vietnamese don't like anybody else, and they don't like the Burmese. And so it's just like home that way. Everybody doesn't like the neighbors. But you can go to, this is a elephant war memorial outside of Bangkok where they have bronze statues of the elephants. But if you go on one of the elephant parks, you can actually go riding on elephants that on special occasions they'll dress in the elephant armor, and then they'll bring out the old weapons and they'll recreate some of the great battles of history, which were, of course, no fun when you were there. Now, Bangkok was similarly a fortified capital built on the banks of the Chao Praya River. When the Burmese sacked the old capital, the king of Thailand, Rama II, moved and started Bangkok on this lower bend down further in the river, and it had a number of canals built around it so it would be protected from any invaders and also provide transit to the outlying areas. So one of the temples was there originally, but it was built around with the larger, what's called the Ratan Kosin royal city in the center of Bangkok. And then the river canals and the districts were built with more and more canals as the capital grew. At a certain point, King Chulalongkorn gave land to anybody who would dig a canal out into the marshlands and out into the outer lying areas, so that around the fort there were a lot of other constructions built. There was originally a fortress to protect them from more of the Burmese and other battles, but that's all been taken down and built into a larger city. But by the mid-1700s, the city of Bangkok was an incredible lacework of canals, and there were said to have been over 100,000 small craft that went around the city. It must have been a lot quieter than the more than 100,000 taxis that are there honking today, but it was a lacework. Most of the klongs, they're called, the canals, have been filled in for road work. One of the problems of Bangkok, it is on a soft mud alluvial plain, and the land continues to sink. When the monsoon comes, it's often flooded, and in modern times the city's been built up higher and higher with proper drainage. There are only a limited number of the old canals that are left. Now you can see from a satellite view the city is really quite large. This is a park reserve, but the main town is right there. But there's about 4 million people within the capital district, so it's not a small town. As you've seen, it's very big and quite busy, and in recent decades there's been a lot of construction of trains and highways to make it a little more functional. So when you come in, we're going to be docked down at the commercial dockage down on the south side of the city, and it'll be about a 40-minute drive in good traffic to get to the right downtown. Some of you are going to go right downtown, and they have to add another hour every day if you're going to match the rush hour. The center city's right here. The Dusit area is where the king lives now, and then there's a whole variety of suburban areas. I once went to stay with a friend outside in Bangkok, and he told me that he had lived in a thatched wooden house out in the rice fields when he was a kid, but now he lives in a high-rise apartment right on the same land where he grew up, and now he gets on the train to go downtown to work. And so this transformation of Bangkok from a rural village kind of a city to a modern industrial high-rise and infrastructure city is quite remarkable. There's a new rail lines that go over the highways, big highways, major train stations that go up to the other cities of Chiang Mai and other northern cities. But here is the heart of the royal city where many of you, if you haven't been there, I do recommend going to seeing it. This is the former small island that was built as the royal city of Bangkok, and now most of the canals have been filled in and there are major broad roads to the center. This is the Sanam Luang, which is the royal garden area, which is now a large public gathering field where they have political demonstrations and public gatherings for celebrations. Here's the Grand Palace, and then the Wat Phra Emperor Buddha Temple and the other center temples of the royal palace. On the outside, there's this is an interesting place you see, the Lac Muang. I don't have a picture of it because it's sort of in the middle of a traffic area, but it is the center of the city by Hindu cosmology. There's a Shiva Lingam, which is a big rising column around which the city is built. Then you can see that the other government offices and other major universities and businesses are all mostly to the east of the palace, which faces the great Chao Praya River. Now, this river is the reason why there is a city here. It's called the River of Kings because the royal palaces were always facing on the river. They had their royal barges for traveling around, and as you see, the city's built up considerably all over the river banks with a lot of luxury hotels, particularly right along the banks. This river does drain all the way from the Golden Triangle up in Burma, Laos, up in that area. Chiang Mai, if you haven't been up there, is up right about there. But it all comes draining down, and particularly during monsoon season when there's a lot of the rain coming down, there's a lot of flooding all through the valley. Then it dries out very much in the summer. Unfortunately, due to the deforestation of much of the teak forest, there's areas on the Chao Phraya River that have become sand dune deserts because of the deforestation and the runoff of the water, and it has made an ecological disaster in a lot of the parts of the upper valley. Now they're reforesting and growing teak plantations in that area to try to restore the natural balance. But here's a view back in the 1920s of the royal barge parades on the Chao Phraya off of the palace dock. And this is one of the features of Bangkok. It only happens rarely on the king's birthday and on wedding dates and cremation dates and the royal calendar. They'll bring out these tremendous barges from their sheds. Each one has their own name, and they're considered sacred vessels. They have up to 100 rowers, and then they will go in slow processions up and down the river, and then the royal family will go off to give offerings at some of the shoreside temples. And the honored oarsmen also have a tradition of singing boat songs they call bot le roi, which are rowing chants, sort of like shanties that they will sing. So everybody quietly listens on the shore as the rowers sing, and they take the royal family up and down the river. Back into the town, though, you have few of them remain, but back in the old days, the whole city was interlaced with this kind of shoreside homes with the markets and the boats, and then you see a bridge over it. And so this was the magical kind of a place when foreigners first came to Bangkok. They thought this was quite a remarkable place. So when Joseph Conrad came in 1888, he wrote that Bangkok was spread largely on both banks of the Oriental capital, which had not yet suffered any white conqueror. Here and there in the distance, above the crowd of the low brown roof ridges, tower great piles of masonry, the king's palace, temples, gorgeous and dilapidated, crumbling under the vertical sunlight, tremendous, overpowering, almost palpable, which seemed to enter one's breast with the breath of one's nostril and soak into one's limbs from every pore of the skin. Well, obviously he was there before air conditioning made it easy off of a bus. But anyway, the city has gone on to build up vastly and pave over much of the klongs. Here's a view of the royal, Ratan Kosin, the central royal city. And then if we have the time, which of course our visit is quite clipped, but if you've stayed in Bangkok for any time, you've invariably gotten out on a riverboat. And there are docks and sort of river taxis all along. They're larger ones, and then there are these, they call the long-tail boats. But for just a few baht, you can get on with everybody and cross the river, go stop in the various stops. So this is a river town it still has its river traffic intact. Unfortunately, these long-tail boats, they're sort of a bit of a monster on the river because there's a automobile engine mounted on a pivot with a long shaft, and the propeller drops in the water, and then the helmsman just pulls the engine and all around. But you can imagine driving in your car with no acoustic separation from your engine. These things go roaring, and it makes the river a loud traffic lane, but then they'll zip up and they'll go up in the canals and can go places that the larger boats can't go. The